The hook. The battle begins. The galaxy was burning. For decades, the Galactic Federation had ruled with an iron fist, crushing anyone who dared to oppose them. They had the numbers, the technology, and the arrogance to believe they were unbeatable. Entire civilizations had fallen under their might, their planets stripped of resources, their people enslaved or eradicated. Resistance was futile. At least, that's what the Federation wanted everyone to believe. But then, there were the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders came from a planet so dangerous that survival itself was a daily battle. Their world was filled with toxic storms, volcanic eruptions, and creatures that could tear a person apart in seconds. Only the strongest survived, and those who did were forged into warriors unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Federation called them savages, primitives, a nuisance to be exterminated. Yet no matter how hard the Federation tried, the Deathworlders refused to die. Now, the war was at its breaking point. The Deathworlders were outnumbered and outgunned. Their allies had abandoned them, their fleets reduced to scattered debris across the galaxy. All that remained was their last stronghold, a small barren planet hidden in the outer rim. The Federation had found it. Above the dark planet, hundreds of Federation warships gathered, their massive forms blocking out the stars. From sleek destroyers to colossal dreadnoughts, the fleet was a testament to the Federation's overwhelming power. Inside the flagship, Admiral Kale stood on the bridge, a satisfied smile on his face. "This is it," Kale said, his voice dripping with confidence. "The end of the Deathworlders. No one survives the Federation." His officers laughed and cheered. They had waited years for this moment, and now victory was within their grasp. All they needed to do was give the order, and their fleet would rain fire upon the Deathworlders' last stronghold, wiping them from existence. But then, something unexpected happened. "Admiral," a young officer called out, her voice uncertain. "We're detecting a ship." Kale frowned. "What kind of ship?" "It's small, sir. A single battleship, coming out of the planet's atmosphere." The room fell silent. A single battleship. Against the might of the Federation fleet, it was laughable. Kale smirked and waved a hand dismissively. "Let them come. One ship won't make a difference." The Federation fleet turned its attention to the approaching battleship. It was unlike anything they had seen before, sleek and angular. Its black hull seemed to absorb the light around it, giving it an almost ghostly appearance. It moved with a grace that defied its size, slipping past asteroids and debris with ease. The Federation scanners struggled to lock onto the ship. Its readings were strange, fluctuating wildly as if the ship didn't entirely exist in this dimension. The officers exchanged nervous glances, but Kale remained unimpressed. "Fire a warning shot," he ordered. "Let them know they're wasting their time." One of the Federation destroyers fired a beam of bright energy toward the lone battleship. The beam cut through space, heading straight for the ship, but just as it was about to hit, the battleship vanished. In a flash of light, it reappeared on the other side of the destroyer, completely unarmed. The room erupted into chaos. "How did it?" "That's impossible." "What kind of ship is that?" Cal's smirk faltered as he stared at the screen. The battleship moved closer, its engines glowing with a strange, pulsing light. It seemed to hum with energy, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone on the bridge. "Admiral," the young officer said, her voice shaking. "The ship is charging weapons." Cal's eyes narrowed. "All ships, prepare to fire. Take it down now." Before the Federation fleet could react, the battleship unleashed its first attack. A beam of pure, crackling energy shot out from its front, slicing through space like a blade. The beam struck one of the Federation cruisers, and within seconds, the massive ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, causing smaller ships to veer off course. On the bridge, Kale gripped the railing, his face pale. "What kind of weapon is that?" The battleship didn't stop. It fired again, this time taking out 2 more ships in one strike. The Federation fleet, once so confident, now scrambled to regroup. Panic spread like wildfire as officers shouted orders and alarms blared. "This can't be happening," one officer cried. "It's just one ship." Cale slammed his fist onto the console. "Enough. Surround it. Overwhelm it with firepower." The Federation ships moved into formation, surrounding the lone battleship. Hundreds of weapons locked onto it, ready to fire. But the battleship didn't flee. Instead, it slowed, almost as if daring the fleet to attack. Cale grinned, a hint of his confidence returning. "Let's see how strong it really is. Fire everything." The fleet unleashed a barrage of energy beams, missiles, and plasma cannons. The space around the battleship erupted in a storm of destruction. For a moment, it seemed as if the ship had been obliterated. But as the smoke cleared, the battleship emerged, untouched. On the bridge, Cale stared at the screen in disbelief. The battleship's hull shimmered, as if protected by an invisible shield. Slowly, it turned to face the flagship, its weapons charging once more. For the first time in his career, Admiral Cale felt fear. And the battleship fired. A mysterious creation. The lone battleship, now the deadliest force in the galaxy, wasn't just a machine. It was the culmination of desperation, ingenuity, and the unrelenting will of the Deathworlders. Its very existence was a mystery to the Galactic Federation, but to the Deathworlders, it was their last, fragile hope. Years earlier, deep within the desolate wastelands of their unforgiving planet, the Deathworlders had faced a grim reality. Their fleets were no match for the Galactic Federation's overwhelming numbers, and their resources were dwindling. Most of their leaders wanted to surrender, but a small group of visionaries, scientists, engineers, and soldiers, refused to give up. This group operated in complete secrecy, hidden even from their own people. They called themselves the Last Forge, a nod to the ancient smiths of their world who once created legendary weapons to defend their tribes. Their mission was clear: to build a weapon so powerful, so unorthodox, that it could challenge the Federation and change the course of the war. The Last Forge worked in an underground lab carved into the heart of a volcanic mountain. The lab was surrounded by rivers of molten rock, toxic gases, and constant seismic activity. A perfect hiding place, as no one else could survive there. Here, the Deathworlders' greatest minds began their work. The Vindicator, as the battleship was later called, started as a dream sketched on a piece of worn paper. Dr. Eleonora, the lead scientist, presented her idea to the Forge's council. It wasn't just a ship, it was an extension of their planet's brutality, a weapon that harnessed the very elements that had shaped the Deathworlders into survivors. "This ship will not only fight," Eleonora had said, her voice steady despite the doubt in the room. "It will terrify. It will adapt. It will remind the galaxy why no one challenges those born of this world." Her vision was bold and dangerous. The Vindicator's power source would be an unstable core of raw planetary energy, harvested from the volatile elements beneath their feet. This energy was so destructive that early prototypes exploded in catastrophic failures. But the Deathworlders were not easily deterred. Over the years, they built and rebuilt, testing new designs and pushing the limits of what was possible. Many of their engineers were killed in the process, victims of the unstable core or unforeseen malfunctions. Yet each loss only strengthened their resolve. Their planet had taught them one unshakable truth: survival comes at a cost. What made the Vindicator unique wasn't just its power source. Its hull was forged from a rare alloy found only in the planet's deepest caves. This alloy, combined with nanotechnology, created a material that could bend light, making the ship nearly invisible to most detection systems. The battleship's weapons were equally revolutionary: energy cannons that absorbed and redirected enemy fire, turning their attacks into devastating counterstrikes. But the real genius of the Vindicator lay in its eye. Known as Icarus, the AI was designed not just to pilot the ship, but to think like a Deathworlder. Icarus learned from every battle, adapting to enemy strategies and environments with terrifying efficiency. It was more than a machine. It was a warrior, built to fight alongside its creators. As the Vindicator neared completion, the last Forge faced their greatest challenge: convincing the Deathworlder leadership to trust their creation. The Council of Elders, hardened by years of war, were skeptical. They saw the ship as a gamble, a waste of precious resources that could be used to build conventional weapons. Captain Dren, a young but fiercely loyal soldier, stepped forward to defend the Vindicator. He was the only member of the military who had been part of the last Forge from the beginning, and he had witnessed the ship's evolution firsthand. "This is not just a battleship," Dren told the Council. "It's our survival. The Federation sees us as weak because we don't have their numbers or their technology. But this ship isn't about numbers. It's about who we are. It's about showing the galaxy what Deathworlders can do when we're pushed to the brink." The Council finally relented, though their support was lukewarm at best. Dren was given command of the Vindicator, and the last Forge bid farewell to the ship they had poured their souls into. As it left the volcanic mountain for the first time, its engines roaring with untamed energy, every member of the Forge watched in awe and fear. They had created a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Now, it was up to Dren to use it. Back in the present, the Vindicator moved like a predator among prey, tearing through the Federation fleet with calculated precision. On the bridge, Dren stood tall, his eyes locked on the holographic display, showing the enemy ships in disarray. "Icarus," he said, his voice calm. "Status report." The AI's voice was smooth and confident. "All systems operating at full capacity. Enemy fleet's formation is collapsing. Projected victory, 87%. "Good," Dren replied. "Let's give them something to remember." The Vindicator charged forward, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. The Federation ships scrambled to reposition, but it was too late. The battleship fired a concentrated blast, obliterating another cluster of enemy vessels. Inside the Federation flagship, Admiral Kale watched in horror as his fleet fell apart. The once confident commander now looked like a man facing his worst nightmare. "What kind of monster is this?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. On the Vindicator, Dren allowed himself a rare smile. The last Forge had done the impossible. The galaxy had underestimated the Deathworlders for the last time. The Federation's fatal mistake. Admiral Kale gripped the edge of the command console as the Federation flagship shuddered from another distant explosion. The fleet was in chaos. What had started as a simple, routine annihilation of a primitive species had turned into a slaughter, his slaughter. One ship, just one, was ripping apart the most advanced armada in the galaxy. "Report," Kale barked, his voice breaking through the din of panicked officers. "Admiral, we've lost 4 more ships. Cruisers Omega-7 through Omega-10 are gone," stammered an officer, his face pale with fear. "The energy readings from that battleship are off the charts. Our scanners can't even analyze it." "I don't need excuses," Kale snapped, slamming his fist onto the console. "We are the Federation. We don't lose to some backward savages." Despite his bravado, the fear in the room was palpable. The fleet's officers and crew had never seen anything like this before. The Deathworlders were supposed to be an insignificant nuisance, a species that survived by sheer stubbornness rather than skill or intellect. Yet here they were, pinned down by a single relentless foe. Elsewhere in the fleet, on board one of the smaller frigates, Commander Terran watched the battle unfold from his observation deck. The Vindicator, cloaked in a shimmering haze of distorted light, darted between the Federation ships like a wolf among sheep. Its movements were precise, almost surgical, as it targeted key vessels and left others untouched. It wasn't just attacking, it was dismantling them. Terran leaned closer to the display, his brow furrowed. "They're not just shooting at random," he muttered to himself. "They're breaking our formation." Behind him, his tactical officer nodded grimly. "It's forcing us to cluster tighter. They're herding us like cattle." The realization sent a chill down Terran's spine. This wasn't the work of mindless brutes or some desperate gamble. The Deathworlders had a plan, a strategy that was working far too well. Back on the Federation flagship, Admiral Kell's nerves were beginning to fray. The Vindicator had claimed another group of destroyers, leaving the wreckage drifting like glowing embers against the blackness of space. His officers frantically scrambled to regain control of the situation, but the Federation fleet had never been trained for this kind of warfare. They relied on overwhelming numbers and technology, not adaptability. "Admiral," a communications officer called out, "incoming message from High Command. They want to know." "Tell High Command I'm handling it." Kale interrupted. His voice was sharp, but the desperation behind it was clear. "I don't need their interference." He turned back to the holographic display, glaring at the glowing red dot that represented the Vindicator. "Surround it," he ordered. "I don't care how fast it moves. Box it in and overwhelm it with firepower." The Federation ships began to reposition, forming a tightening circle around the lone battleship. Kell's plan was simple: sheer numbers. No matter how powerful the Vindicator was, it couldn't survive a full barrage from every ship in the fleet. Or so he thought. On board the Vindicator, Captain Dren stood silently, watching the enemy fleet adjust their formation. Their desperation was evident, and he almost felt pity for them. Almost. "Icarus," Dren said, his voice calm. "Do they think this is going to work?" The AI's voice responded with a faint trace of amusement. "They're following predictable patterns, Captain. Their tactic relies on overwhelming force, but they underestimate our ability to adapt." Dren nodded. Adaptation. That was the key to the Deathworlders' survival. While other species relied on stability and comfort, the Deathworlders had thrived in chaos. Their entire history was a testament to overcoming the impossible, and the Vindicator was no different. "Icarus, analyze their formation and find the weakest link," Dren ordered. "If they want to box us in, let's show them why cages don't work on Deathworlders." The AI processed the data in milliseconds. Weakest point identified. Their flank on the Omega vector is underdefended. A concentrated strike will destabilize their formation. Dren smirked. "Good. Let's teach them what happens when you corner a predator." The counterattack. As the Federation fleet tightened its circle, the Vindicator suddenly changed course, accelerating toward the weakest point in their formation. Its energy cannons lit up, firing in rapid succession. 3 frigates exploded in quick succession, and the shockwaves threw the surrounding ships into disarray. "What's happening?" Kell roared, his eyes widening as the red dot on his display broke through their lines. "How is it moving so fast?" "They're exploiting a gap in our formation, Admiral," an officer replied. "We can't keep up with its maneuvers." The Vindicator weaved through the fleet, its adaptive AI predicting and countering every move the Federation ships made. Missiles and energy blasts flew past it, missing by inches as the battleship danced between the chaos. Each shot it fired was precise, targeting engines, weapons systems, and critical infrastructure. Within minutes, the Federation's carefully planned formation had collapsed. Kell's fatal error. Admiral Kell's fury turned to panic as the realization sank in. He had underestimated the Deathworlders, dismissed them as mere savages. Now his fleet was paying the price for his arrogance. "Pull back." Kale finally shouted, his voice cracking. "Regroup at the flagship. We need tow." The room shook violently as the Vindicator unleashed another devastating blast, this time aimed directly at the flagship's protective shield. The shield held for a moment before shattering like glass, leaving the massive vessel exposed. Kale stared at the display, his hands trembling. This isn't possible. But it was. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting. They were winning. And for the first time in his career, Admiral Kale realized the truth. The Federation wasn't prepared for this enemy. Not for the Deathworlders. Not for the Vindicator. The battleship's secret weapon. The Galactic Federation had never encountered a weapon like this. The Vindicator wasn't just a battleship. It was a masterpiece of destruction, crafted by survivors who thrived in an environment that should have killed them. Every aspect of the ship was designed for one purpose: to turn the tide of the war. The secret behind the energy core, deep within the Vindicator's hull, its heart pulsed with an unstable brilliance. The ship's energy core was not powered by traditional fuel or fusion. It was something entirely unique, a raw, living energy harvested from the Deathworlders' planet. Their homeworld's environment was a crucible of chaos, filled with volatile storms, magnetic anomalies, and naturally occurring crystals that radiated immense, unpredictable power. Early on, the Deathworlders had learned to harness this energy for survival, but using it as a weapon was another challenge altogether. The scientists of the last forge spent years refining the core, testing its limits, and designing a containment field that could handle the energy's destructive nature. They called it the Wrath Core, a fitting name for the engine of vengeance. The core didn't just power the ship, it was the ship. It enabled the Vindicator to perform feats no other vessel could replicate. Instant bursts of acceleration, cloaking technology that bent light and radiation, and weaponry that redefined the concept of firepower. But it came with a cost. Dren's calculated gamble. On the Vindicator's bridge, Captain Dren stood before a holographic display, his eyes locked on the Federation's flagship. The Wrath Core hummed softly, its power resonating through the ship like a heartbeat. He could feel its energy, as if the ship were alive. "Icarus," Dren said, his voice calm. "What's the core's status?" The AI responded instantly. "Core energy levels at 73%, Captain. Sustained use of current weapons output will reduce reserves to critical within 6 minutes." Dren frowned. That wasn't much time, but it was enough. The Vindicator was never designed for prolonged engagements. It was a scalpel, not a hammer. "Prepare the core for an overcharge," Dren ordered. Icarus hesitated, a rare occurrence for the AI. Overcharging the core will destabilize containment. The risk of catastrophic failure increases tow. "I know the risks," Dren interrupted. "Just get it ready. We're finishing this." The Federation's desperation. On the flagship, Admiral Kell's composure had shattered completely. He paced the bridge, barking orders at his officers, but it was clear he no longer had control of the battle. The Vindicator was unlike anything he had ever faced. Faster, stronger, and utterly unpredictable. "Admiral, the battleship is charging its core," a tactical officer shouted. "Energy readings are spiking off the charts." Kell's eyes narrowed. "It's overloading itself," he muttered. "It must be trying to take us out in one final attack. All ships, focus fire on that core. If we destroy it now, the explosion will take them with it." The fleet regrouped, their weapons locking onto the Vindicator. Energy beams and missiles rained down on the battleship, but its cloaking field and evasive maneuvers made it a nearly impossible target. Still, Kell was determined to end the fight, no matter the cost. The unleashing of wrath. Inside the Vindicator, the Wrath Core pulsed brighter and brighter, its energy spilling into the ship's systems. The hull glowed faintly, shimmering like molten metal as the core's power reached dangerous levels. "Icarus," Dren said, gripping the console tightly. "Release the primary weapon. All energy to the front cannon." The AI complied, diverting every ounce of power into the ship's main weapon. The battleship's prow split open, revealing a massive energy cannon unlike anything the Federation had ever encountered. It was the culmination of the Deathworlders' ingenuity, a weapon designed to channel the raw, chaotic energy of their world into a single, devastating blast. "Target locked," Icarus said. "Awaiting your command, Captain." Dren took a deep breath. Fire. The Vindicator unleashed its wrath. A devastating blow. A beam of pure energy erupted from the battleship, brighter than a star and more destructive than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The beam cut through space, striking the Federation's flagship dead center. The ship's shields collapsed instantly, and the beam continued, slicing through the hull like a hot knife through butter. The flagship didn't just explode, it disintegrated. The energy wave rippled outward, engulfing nearby ships in a cascade of destruction. Smaller vessels were torn apart, their fragments scattering like ashes in the void. The remaining Federation ships faltered, their formations collapsing as panic spread through their ranks. On the Vindicator, Dren watched the display as the flagship disappeared from existence. The Wrath Core's energy levels dropped dangerously low, and alarms blared throughout the ship. "Icarus," Dren said, his voice steady. "Status: core stability at 12%. Recommend immediate disengagement to prevent total meltdown." Dren nodded. "Understood. Plot a course back to the nebula." The Federation retreats. Admiral Kale was gone, his flagship reduced to dust. The surviving Federation ships, leaderless and terrified, began to retreat. Their confidence had been shattered, their might broken by a single Deathworlder battleship. As the Vindicator vanished into the shadows of space, the remaining Federation officers could only watch in silence. The Deathworlders had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the war with one ship, a ship powered by the unforgiving spirit of their world. Sacrifice and strategy. The remnants of the Galactic Federation fleet floated in the void, their pride shattered and their formations in disarray. Smoke and debris clouded the battlefield as the Deathworlders' battleship, the Vindicator, disappeared into the nebula. But this wasn't a retreat. It was a calculated move, one that would set the stage for their most daring gambit yet. The captain's plan. Inside the Vindicator, Captain Dren leaned against the console, sweat dripping from his brow. The Wrath Core's alarms echoed through the bridge, a relentless reminder of the ship's fragile state. "Icarus, report," Dren said, his voice hoarse. "Core stability is at 9%, Captain," the eye replied. "Containment failure is imminent unless we reduce power consumption. Estimated survival time under current conditions, 15 minutes. Dren clenched his fists. The Vindicator had done the impossible, but its victory came at a cost. The ship's experimental core was reaching its limit, and if it failed, the resulting explosion would destroy everything within a massive radius, including the Deathworlders' last stronghold. But Dren wasn't finished yet. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to end the war. "Prepare the stealth systems," he ordered. "We're heading deeper into the nebula." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The nebula was a dangerous place, a swirling storm of radiation and magnetic anomalies. Even the Vindicator wasn't immune to its hazards, but they trusted Dren, and more importantly, they trusted the Vindicator. The nebula's trap. As the Vindicator slipped into the dense, glowing clouds of the nebula, the Federation fleet hesitated. The few remaining admirals debated their next move, torn between retreating to regroup or pursuing their elusive enemy. "It's a trap," warned Admiral Verson, the senior officer left in command. "The Deathworlders are luring us into the nebula. Our ships aren't built to withstand the radiation. But if we let them escape," countered a younger officer, "they'll regroup and come back stronger. We can't afford to let them disappear." Verson frowned. He knew the officer was right. The Federation couldn't show weakness, not after the devastating loss they had just suffered. With a reluctant nod, he issued the order. "All ships, advance into the nebula. Track that battleship and destroy it." The fleet moved forward, their sensors struggling to pierce the nebula's dense energy fields. Blinded and vulnerable, they pressed on, unaware that they were walking straight into the Deathworlders' trap. The Vindicator strikes again. Deeper within the nebula, Captain Dren watched the Federation ships enter the storm, their massive forms flickering on his scanners. The nebula's radiation played havoc with their systems, forcing them into tighter formations to avoid losing each other. "Icarus," Dren said, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Activate the disruption protocols." The AI complied, releasing a series of modified energy pulses into the nebula. These pulses amplified the nebula's natural magnetic anomalies, creating waves of chaos that sent Federation ships spiraling off course. The Vindicator moved like a ghost, using the nebula's cover to its advantage. Its weapons fired in precise bursts, targeting critical systems and disabling ships one by one. The Federation fleet, already weakened and disoriented, began to crumble. A desperate Federation counterattack. Admiral Verson slammed his fists onto the console, his frustration boiling over. "What is that ship?" he roared. "How is it doing this?" "We've lost another squadron, Admiral," an officer reported. "Radiation levels are climbing. Our shields can't handle much more." Verson gritted his teeth. The Vindicator was toying with them, using the nebula as a weapon. But he wasn't about to go down without a fight. "All remaining ships, focus fire on the nebula's core," he ordered. "If we can destabilize the energy fields, we can flush them out." The Federation fleet redirected their fire, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts into the swirling storm. The nebula responded violently, its energy field surging and creating massive shockwaves. Inside the Vindicator, the ship rocked as the nebula's chaos intensified. Consoles sparked, and crew members scrambled to maintain control. "Captain, the nebula is becoming unstable," one officer shouted. "We won't last long in here." Dren's jaw tightened. He knew the Federation's gambit would destroy them both, but he also knew the Deathworlders had one final card to play. The sacrifice. "Icarus," Dren said, his voice steady. "Prepare for core detachment." The AI hesitated. "Captain, detaching the core will result in—" "I know what it means," Dren interrupted. "Just do it." The bridge fell silent as the crew realized what Dren was planning. The Wrath Core was the Vindicator's heart, but it was also its greatest weapon. If they detached it and sent it into the nebula's core, the resulting explosion would obliterate the Federation fleet, but it would also destroy the Vindicator. "Captain, you can't," one officer began, but Dren cut him off with a stern look. "This is what we were built for," he said. "The Vindicator isn't just a ship, it's a symbol. And if we have to give everything to protect our people, then so be it." The crew nodded, their fear replaced by resolve. They had always known the stakes, and they trusted Dren to lead them to the end. The final gambit. The Vindicator's Wrath Core was detached, its containment field flickering as it drifted into the heart of the nebula. The Federation fleet fired desperately, trying to destroy it before it reached critical mass, but their attacks only hastened the inevitable. "Core detonation in 10 seconds, Icarus announced. Dren stood tall, his eyes fixed on the display. "For the Deathworlders," he said quietly. The Wrath Core erupted in a blinding explosion, its energy cascading through the nebula. The Federation fleet was consumed in an instant, their ships torn apart by the unleashed chaos. The Vindicator was caught in the blast, its hull disintegrating as the crew braced for the end. The legacy lives on. As the dust settled, the nebula fell silent, its once turbulent energy now a quiet glow. The Federation's fleet was gone, and the Deathworlders' last stronghold remained untouched. Back on their homeworld, the Deathworlders watched the battle unfold through intercepted transmissions. When the nebula finally went dark, they knew what had happened. The Vindicator had sacrificed itself to save them. But the Deathworlders were not broken. Inspired by the crew's bravery, they vowed to rebuild, not just their fleets, but their future. And across the galaxy, whispers of the Deathworlders' defiance thread like wildfire, a reminder that even the smallest spark can burn the brightest. The final stand. The nebula's glow dimmed, and silence fell across the remnants of the battlefield. The Federation fleet was no more, its ships reduced to fragments scattered among the cosmic storm. But as the Deathworlders back on their planet celebrated, the reality became clear. The war wasn't over. Not yet. In the heart of the Galactic Federation, High Command received the devastating news of their fleet's annihilation. Shock turned to fury, and orders were issued immediately. From the Federation's core worlds, a second fleet was dispatched, a fleet far larger and deadlier than the one that had fallen. This was no longer a campaign of conquest. It was a mission of vengeance. The Dithworlders, however, had not been idle. Despite the loss of the Vindicator, its sacrifice had bought them precious time. And time was something the Dithworlders knew how to use well. Rebuilding the Vindicator's legacy. Deep beneath the surface of their ravaged planet, the engineers and scientists of the Last Forge worked tirelessly. Inspired by the Vindicator's success, and knowing another attack was inevitable, they began constructing a new weapon. Something even more powerful, more versatile, and more terrifying than the original. This new weapon wasn't a single battleship, it was a fleet. Using the data collected from the Vindicator's battle, they created smaller, more agile ships powered by miniaturized RAF cores. These ships were designed for hit-and-run tactics, each one capable of overwhelming firepower and stealth. Above all, the new fleet shared one key feature, a hive-mind AI system based on Icarus. Every ship was interconnected, sharing data and adapting as a unified force. The Dithworlders no longer relied on one ship to carry their hopes. They were now a swarm, a storm that would descend upon their enemies. The Federation's superweapon. The Federation's new fleet was not just massive. It was equipped with their latest experimental weapon, the Exo-Spear. The Exo-Spear was a massive, spear-shaped vessel capable of firing an antimatter lance, a weapon so powerful it could obliterate entire planets in one strike. This was the Federation's answer to the Vindicator, a symbol of their relentless pursuit of dominance. At the helm of the Exo-Spear was Admiral Ceres, a ruthless and calculating leader known for her cold efficiency. Unlike Admiral Kale, she had no illusions about the Dithworlders. She respected their cunning and prepared accordingly. The Exo-Spear was flanked by hundreds of advanced warships, each one designed to counter stealth and adapt to enemy strategies. "This ends now," Ceres declared to her fleet. "No more delays. No more mistakes. The Dithworlders will be eradicated, and their defiance will be erased from history." The final battlefield. The Dithworlders knew the Federation fleet was coming. Their spies had intercepted transmissions, and their scouts had tracked the fleet's movements. But instead of hiding or retreating, the Dithworlders chose to fight. In the shadow of a massive asteroid belt, the Dithworlders prepared their ambush. The asteroid field was a labyrinth of rocks and debris, perfect for the kind of guerrilla warfare they excelled at. The new fleet of RAF ships hid among the asteroids, their cloaking fields rendering them invisible. As the Federation fleet approached, the Dithworlders waited in silence, their ships powered down to avoid detection. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer knew the stakes. This was the final stand. If they failed, their people would be wiped out. But failure was not in their nature. The ambush. When the Federation fleet entered the asteroid field, the Dithworlders struck. From the shadows, the RAF ships emerged, their weapons blazing. Energy beams and missiles tore through the Federation's vanguard, destroying dozens of ships in the first few minutes. The hive-mind AI allowed the Dithworlders' fleet to move with eerie precision, their attacks coordinated to exploit every weakness. Admiral Ceres, however, was not caught off guard. "Deploy countermeasures," she barked. "Engage adaptive targeting systems." The Federation fleet responded quickly, using drones and EMP bursts to disrupt the Dithworlders' formations. The battle turned into a chaotic melee, with ships weaving through the asteroid field in a deadly dance. The Exo-Spear's arrival. In the midst of the battle, the Exo-Spear moved into position. Its massive antimatter lance began charging, its energy signature lighting up the battlefield like a second sun. The Dithworlders' sensors detected the weapon's activation, and panic rippled through their ranks. "Captain," one of the RAF ship pilots radioed to Dren's successor, Captain Lyra, "they're targeting the asteroid belt. If they fire that weapon, it'll destroy everything." Lyra, commanding from a central RAF ship, remained calm. "Then we don't let them fire. All units, focus fire on the exosphere. Take it down at all costs. The Deathworlders' fleet converged on the exosphere, their ships darting through the Federation's defenses like angry hornets. The exosphere's shields absorbed the initial assault, but cracks began to form under the relentless barrage. The final sacrifice. Admiral Ceres watched as her ship's systems reported critical damage. She knew the exosphere wouldn't survive much longer, but she refused to retreat. "Divert all power to the lance," she ordered. "If we're going down, we're taking them with us." The antimatter lance reached full charge, and the exosphere prepared to fire. But before it could unleash its devastating weapon, a single RAF ship broke through the Federation's defenses. Its pilot, a young Deathworlder named Cal, named after their hated enemy, made the ultimate sacrifice. Cal's ship collided with the exosphere's core, triggering a chain reaction. The resulting explosion consumed the exosphere in a blinding wave of light, taking out the remaining Federation ships in its radius. The aftermath. As the dust settled, the Deathworlders emerged victorious. Their fleet, though battered and diminished, had survived. They had not only defended their homeworld, but had shown the galaxy that even the mightiest empire could fall to those who refused to give up. The Federation's reign of terror was over. Across the galaxy, other oppressed species began to rise up, inspired by the Deathworlders' defiance. The war was won, not just for the Deathworlders, but for freedom itself. Captain Lyra, standing on the bridge of her damaged ship, looked out at the stars. "We survived," she said softly. "And we'll keep surviving." The galaxy would never forget the Deathworlders, or the ship that started it all, the Vindicator. Victory and legacy. The galaxy stood still. The once mighty Federation, the most feared force in the universe, was shattered. Its fleets were gone, its leaders silenced, and its grip on the stars dissolved into whispers of fear and uncertainty. The Deathworlders, a people born from a planet of relentless hardship, had won the war. But victory wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The aftermath of war. The asteroid field, now littered with the wreckage of countless ships, became a graveyard of the Federation's arrogance. The Deathworlders salvaged what they could from the remains, repurposing technology and resources to rebuild their own fleets and fortify their planet. Back on their homeworld, the survivors celebrated not with songs or grand speeches, but with a quiet, collective exhale. They had lived through the unimaginable, and now they could finally look to the future. Families reunited, engineers repaired what was broken, and children who had grown up under the shadow of war saw the stars as a promise rather than a threat. Yet, the scars of the war remained. The leaders of the Deathworlders convened to ensure that such a conflict would never happen again. They knew that while the Federation's fleets had been destroyed, the remnants of their empire still lurked in the galaxy, waiting for a chance to rise again. The birth of a new alliance. The victory of the Deathworlders sparked revolutions across the galaxy. Species that had been oppressed by the Federation began to rise up, inspired by the story of the Vindicator and its crew. For the first time in centuries, the balance of power shifted. The Deathworlders reached out to these newly liberated worlds, offering them not conquest, but a chance to rebuild together. They formed the Unified Front, an alliance of independent species dedicated to protecting one another and resisting any future tyranny. The alliance adopted the Vindicator's symbol, a burning star, as its emblem, a reminder that even the smallest light could ignite a galaxy-wide blaze. Captain Lyra, now a hero to her people, was appointed as the first leader of the Unified Front's defense fleet. Though she carried the weight of the war on her shoulders, she accepted the responsibility with pride. "We are not conquerors," she declared in her first address to the Alliance. "We are survivors, and together we will ensure no one else suffers as we have." A message from the stars. Amid the rebuilding efforts, a curious discovery was made. Deep in the asteroid field where the final battle had taken place, a small, undamaged module was recovered. It bore the unmistakable markings of the Vindicator. Inside was a data core, a final message left by Icarus, the ship's eye. The message was simple, yet profound. To those who find this, remember us. We were not the strongest. We were not the most advanced. But we were unyielding. Our strength came not from our weapons, but from our will. Let this be a lesson to all who seek to dominate others. Resilience cannot be crushed, and freedom cannot be extinguished. The message spread quickly across the galaxy, becoming a rallying cry for those still fighting for their freedom. The Deathworlders' story became legend, and the Vindicator was immortalized as the ship that changed the galaxy. A quiet triumph. Years passed, and the galaxy began to heal. The unified front grew stronger, its members working together to rebuild what had been lost. Trade routes reopened, scientific discoveries flourished, and for the first time in generations, the stars were a place of hope rather than fear. On their homeworld, the Deathworlders found peace at last. The last forge, the hidden lab that had created the Vindicator, was decommissioned and turned into a museum. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see where it all began, standing in awe of the ship's blueprints and the stories of its brave crew. Dren's name, along with the names of every crew member who had served on the Vindicator, was etched into a monument in the heart of the Deathworlders' capital. Beneath their names, an inscription read, "They did not fight for glory. They fought for us all." A new chapter. As the Deathworlders looked to the stars, they knew their journey was far from over. Challenges would come, and enemies would rise, but they were no longer alone. They had allies, they had purpose, and they had the unshakable knowledge that they could overcome anything. In the depths of space, the Unified Front's newest flagship, a vessel modeled after the Vindicator, but designed for exploration and peace, prepared for its maiden voyage. Captain Lyra stood on its bridge, her hand resting on the console as she gazed out at the infinite expanse of stars. "We survived," she said softly, echoing Dren's words. "And now, we thrive." With a hum of its engines, the ship disappeared into the void, carrying the legacy of the Deathworlders to the farthest corners of the galaxy. And so, the Deathworlders' story became a beacon, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of hope can never be extinguished.